There are a few people from high school you never expect to see again, especially not half-naked and glistening in the steam of a sauna. For me, that person was Mr. Caldwell. Back then, he was my senior year history teacher, always dressed sharp, button-downs that fit too well, sleeves rolled just enough to show off forearms that didn't belong on a guy who spent his days handing out pop quizzes. Every girl in class had a crush on him, so did I. Quietly, secretly, tucked somewhere between shame and denial. I figured I'd never see him again after graduation. Definitely not in a gym locker room. 6 years later, towel slung low on his hips, hair damp, nodding at me like we were just two guys. "Evan, right?" he said, voice deeper than I remembered. I froze mid-step, towel over my shoulder, my brain doing somersaults. Yeah, wow, Mr. Caldwell?" He chuckled. "Just call me Nick. I haven't been Mr. Caldwell in a long time." Right. I nodded like I wasn't internally spiraling. We made small talk. Where we lived now, what we did, all the polite filler that covers the raw nerves of an unexpected reunion. He said he left teaching a few years back, now worked in nonprofit consulting. I told him I was in marketing, that I just started hitting this gym a few months ago to deal with stress. His eyes flicked over me in a way that didn't feel entirely teacherly. "Well, it looks like it's working." I felt my ears heat up. "I usually do a quick sauna session after lifting," he said, glancing toward the hallway. "You ever go in?" "Sometimes." I lied. I didn't. The idea of being in a tight, hot room with other guys made me feel weirdly exposed. He smiled. "It's a game changer. Helps recovery. You should join me." The sentence hung there a little too long. I nodded, maybe too quickly. "Yeah, cool." He disappeared down the corridor. I stood there for a second, my feet rooted to the floor. Every part of me screamed this was a bad idea, but I followed him anyway. Inside, the sauna was small, wood-paneled, quiet, the kind of heat that clung to your skin before you even sat down. Nick, because that's who he was now, was already inside, top bench, legs stretched out, towel snug around his waist. I sat across from him, trying not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice. His chest was broader than I remembered, tan, lightly dusted with hair. He caught me looking. Didn't flinch. "So," he said, leaning back, eyes on mine. "You were one of my smart kids, right? A P history?" I nodded, suddenly aware of how my towel felt too small. "Yeah, you gave me a B- on my Civil War paper. I'm still bitter." He laughed. "I should have given you an A, but you rambled. You had good instincts, though." I shrugged, letting the silence stretch. The heat settled in, thick and heavy, making my skin feel hypersensitive. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his collarbone, disappearing under the edge of his towel. He shifted, his knee brushing mine briefly. "Not an accident. Couldn't be." I glanced up, and he was already watching me, and then he said it. "You always had a way of looking at me, back then." I noticed. My stomach flipped, my throat went dry. He didn't smile. He just held my gaze. "I used to tell myself I was imagining it," he said, "but seeing you now—" He trailed off, eyes lingering. I should have said something, laughed it off, left. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, "And now?" His answer changed everything. Nick didn't look away. The steam coiled around his face, making it hard to read his expression. But there was a weight to the silence between us now. Dense, charged. "Now," he said slowly, "you're not a kid anymore." I didn't know what to say. My heart was thudding in my chest, too loud in my ears. The sauna had gone from relaxing to suffocating in a matter of seconds. I tried to shift my posture casually, but even that felt revealing. I laughed, too sharp. That's one way to put it. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. The towel rode up his thigh just enough to make me panic look away. "You okay?" he asked, tone softer now. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting to have this kind of talk in a sauna." Nick smiled. "Neither was I. But maybe I should have." I frowned. "Back then?" He shook his head. No, that would have been wrong. You were 17. I was your teacher. There were rules, boundaries. And now? He shrugged, leaning back against the cedar wall. Now you're sitting here, grown, clearly not running out the door. I couldn't tell if it was a statement or a challenge. Either way, he wasn't wrong. I never said anything, I said quietly. In school, how could I? You were you, he chuckled. Believe it or not, I wasn't as oblivious as I pretended to be. That made my head tilt. You knew? I suspected. But even if I had been sure, what was I going to do? Encourage a student to flirt with me? He let out a breath. I liked teaching. I wasn't about to ruin my career for a daydream, but it wasn't just a daydream for me, I admitted, surprised at how easily the words came out. I thought about it, a lot. I figured, he said, his voice low. The way you always hung back after class. The questions that weren't really questions. That time you stayed late under the excuse of needing help with your paper, just so we could talk. I swallowed. I remembered that night vividly. How close he stood behind me when we looked at the laptop screen together. How my whole body buzzed with the tension of wanting something I knew I couldn't have. And now you're here, he continued, looking at me the same way. I didn't deny it. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like both of us were trying to decide where this was going, if either of us was going to take a step forward or back. The heat clung to our skin, making every breath feel heavy. I reached for the ladle and poured more water over the rocks, watching as the steam rose between us. When I glanced back at him, he was still watching me. I wasn't sure, he said suddenly. When I saw you today, I didn't want to assume anything, but then you followed me in here. I leaned back against the wall, towel clinging to my skin. And what do you assume now? Nick smiled slowly, but there was something cautious in his eyes. That you're not the shy kid you used to be. I laughed quietly. No, not anymore. And then, just for a moment, we said nothing. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Nick shifted, standing slowly. For a second, I thought he was leaving, but instead, he stepped off the top bench, moved toward the lower one, closer to me. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, looking down at me, waiting. I looked up, unsure if I was reading him right. If I made the first move, there was no taking it back, no unblurring that line. But I wanted to. And when I stood, the space between us collapsed, like it had been holding its breath for years. We stood there facing each other, the heat wrapping around us like some invisible force pushing us closer. His eyes searched mine almost cautiously, like he wanted to be absolutely certain I was here because I chose to be, not because of some leftover nostalgia or misplaced fantasy from years ago. You've changed, he said quietly. In a good way. The words hit deeper than they should have. I wasn't used to hearing that, not from someone who once saw me during my most awkward, insecure years, not from someone I'd admired so much. So have you, I said. You seem different. Happier, maybe? He let out a soft laugh. I think I'm finally figuring out who I want to be instead of who I'm supposed to be. His voice carried weight, like there were years behind that sentence. Years of hiding or waiting. I sat back down on the lower bench, the wood warm beneath me. He followed, leaving just enough space between us for the possibility of retreat, but neither of us moved away. What made you leave teaching? I asked. He inhaled, long and slow. There were things I loved about it, he said. The conversations, the people, helping someone figure out who they are. He hesitated, but the rest, it felt restrictive. Like I was always performing a version of myself that wasn't completely honest. I nodded, understanding more than he knew. I think about those years a lot, he said. My students, the stories they all had. And then there were a few who stuck with me. His eyes flickered toward me again. You were one of them. My chest tightened. Why? Because you were curious, he said. You cared about everything. even when you pretended not to. You had opinions, passion. You had this fire that you tried really hard to hide. I looked down at my hands. I was scared of being seen. He tilted his head. Are you still? I didn't answer right away. The steam swirled around us, blurring the edges of the room, making it feel like the world outside didn't exist for the moment. I think I want to be seen now, I said finally. Nick's breath caught. Not dramatic, just enough that I noticed. I'm glad, he said. A beat passed. Can I ask you something? I said, voice barely above a whisper. Of course. When you saw me today, did you think it would feel like this? He smiled, soft, uneasy, honest. No, I told myself it wouldn't, that it was just a coincidence. Two adults living their lives. And now, he said, I keep wondering what happens when we walk out of this sauna. The question sat between us. Neither of us had the answer yet, but we both knew we wanted to find out. When I left home for college, I promised myself I'd never let someone hold that kind of power over me again, the kind that made me feel small or invisible. But right there, sitting next to Nick, I didn't feel small at all, just seen. He leaned back a little, giving me space to breathe. His eyes weren't wandering, not lingering anywhere inappropriate. They stayed right on mine, steady, patient. You're thinking too hard, he murmured. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Yeah, well, this is a lot. It is, he agreed, and we don't need to rush anything. We can just talk, or sit, or leave. Whatever you want. It was strange. In high school, he always had this authority to him, like his presence filled the room by default. But now, he wasn't pushing. Every move he made felt deliberate, careful, like he wanted to be sure I knew I had a choice. I rubbed my palms over my towel, my skin warm from the heat. Part of me is still that nervous kid in your class, afraid I'm doing something wrong. You're not, he said immediately. We're two adults who ran into each other at the gym. That's all. And anything beyond that only happens if we both want it. That word want buzzed in my head. My eyes drifted toward the glass door. The hallway outside was empty. The world felt very far away. What did you think about me back then? I asked. I didn't mean for it to come out sounding so vulnerable, but it did. He sighed, thoughtful. You were one of those students who made teaching feel meaningful. You always questioned things, not out of rebellion, but because you cared about the truth. He gave a small smile. Some of the other teachers found you exhausting, I groaned. Of course they did. But I liked that about you, he said. You didn't just accept whatever someone told you. You tried to understand why. I swallowed. And now, he said slowly, I'm sitting here trying very hard not to say something that crosses a line we both know has already shifted. That made my pulse jump. What if I'm okay with that line shifting? I asked quietly. He blinked, just once, and it told me everything. But instead of closing the last inch of space between us, he stood up. Come on, he said gently, offering his hand. Let's get some air, before we melt. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to take his hand, but because taking it felt like a decision. A yes, but I wanted yes. So I reached up, his fingers wrapped around mine. Warm, steady, real. He opened the sauna door, and the blast of cool air hit my skin like a reset button. The locker room was nearly empty, just the hum of vents and the faint clatter of weights in the distance. He didn't let go of my hand right away, and when he finally did, he looked at me like this wasn't the end of a moment, but the start of one. Coffee? He asked. There's a cafe around the corner. Neutral ground. I nodded, heart still racing. Yeah, coffee sounds good. He smiled. That same reassuring, quietly confident smile I remembered, and we started walking toward the exit together. I didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The cool air outside the gym hit us like a wake-up call. I hadn't realized how overheated I was until we stepped into the night, the streetlights reflecting off damp pavement from an earlier rain. Everything felt strangely calm, like the city had decided to give us privacy. Nick held the door open for me, and for a moment, we just stood there, neither of us in a rush to break whatever this thing was between us. "You sure you want that coffee?" he asked, one brow lifting. "We could call this a nice story for later and leave it here." His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. He was giving me an out, a clean exit, no strings attached, and it made me trust him more. I shook my head. "If I leave now, I'll spend the whole night wondering what I just walked away from." He smiled. Not smug, not triumphant, just warm. "Okay then. Coffee." We walked side by side down the sidewalk, our gym bags slung over our shoulders, steam still clinging to our skin. I kept sneaking glances at him, half afraid that if I blinked too long, he'd disappear and I'd wake up in my bed, late for work, wondering if I dreamt the whole thing. The cafe was quiet, mostly empty except for a couple in the corner sharing a late-night pastry and a barista scrolling her phone behind the counter. It smelled like roasted beans and soft music, the kind of place where people had important conversations. We ordered and found a table tucked away near the window. A street lamp cast a soft glow across his face, catching the edges of his jaw, still slightly flushed from the heat. I wrapped my hands around my cup, more for something to do than for warmth. "So," Nick said, leaning forward, "tell me something real. Not the, 'I work in marketing' script. Who's the Evan you don't put on your LinkedIn page?" I let out a breathy laugh. "You go straight for the deep stuff, huh?" "I used to be a teacher," he reminded me. "I'm trained to make people reflect." I thought for a moment. "I'm still figuring myself out. I thought I'd have everything sorted by now. Career, relationships, me. But most days I feel like I'm still catching up." He nodded, like he knew exactly what that felt like. "There's no deadline on becoming yourself." "That sounds like something you told your students," I said. He shrugged. "Sometimes I forget which advice was for them and which was for me." I hesitated before asking the next question. "And you? Why a gym membership and saunas instead of lesson plans and grading?" His hands wrapped around his mug, thumb tracing the rim. "I got tired of pretending," he said, "of acting like who I was something I had to apologize for." His voice was steady, but the words had weight. "A history." I felt something pull tight in my chest. "You don't have to perform with me," I said quietly. He looked up then, really looked, and something eased in his expression, like a knot loosening. "I know," he said. "We talked about life. About regrets that weren't really regrets. About how small choices, like switching gyms or taking the long route home, somehow led to unexpected collisions. The kind that changed you." When we finished our drinks, neither of us made a move to leave. The night stretched out in front of us, not demanding answers, just offering possibilities. Nick glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. "I should let you get home, it's late." I nodded, though every part of me wished the night didn't have to end. Outside again, the air was cooler. We stood under the glow of the streetlight, our breaths faint in the chilly breeze. "This was really nice," he said. "Yeah," I agreed. "It was." He hesitated, hands in his pockets, like he was debating something. Then, "I'd like to see you again," he said. "Outside the gym, outside all this weird context." My heart did something I hadn't felt in a long time. It leapt. "I'd like that too." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes this time. "Good. Then how about—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, hopeful. And for once, I didn't overthink it. "How about Saturday?" I said. His grin widened. "Saturday it is." We exchanged numbers. Quick, simple, but it felt like handing over a piece of something more. He gave a small wave as he backed toward his car. "Good night, Evan." "Good night, Nick." I watched him leave, the taillights disappearing down the street. And as I stood there, alone but not lonely, one thing was completely clear. High school was over, but whatever this was had only just begun. Saturday came quicker than I expected, mostly because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Nick. The way he'd looked at me in the sauna, in the cafe, like he was seeing something I wasn't sure anyone else ever had. I wasn't nervous, exactly. I was restless, charged, like something had shifted inside me, and I was still adjusting to the new shape of it. We kept it casual. Brunch downtown at a quiet little spot he picked, the kind with mismatched mugs and syrup that cost extra, but I didn't care. He was already waiting when I showed up, dressed in jeans and a dark Henley, sleeves pushed up just enough to show the edges of his forearms again. That familiar flutter hit my stomach. "You came," he said with a smile as I walked in. "Would have been stupid not to," I replied, sliding into the booth. It was easy. Too easy, almost. The conversation picked up where it had left off that night outside the gym. Only now, we weren't dancing around anything. He told me about his new work, what it was like helping nonprofits get off the ground. I told him about the weird client who insisted I use Comic Sans in a product pitch. He cringed appropriately. "You always did have a sarcastic streak," he said. "Gotta survive somehow." He looked at me for a second, fork paused mid-air. "I like who you've become." I tried to play it cool, but something about the way he said it, unforced, honest, hit me straight in the chest. "Thanks," I said. "I like who you are now, too." He smiled, but didn't reply right away. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full of something unspoken, something waiting. After brunch, we didn't want the afternoon to end, so we walked through the park nearby. The leaves were just starting to turn, everything gold and red and alive. At one point, our hands brushed, just barely, and neither of us pulled away. "You know," he said after a while, "this is probably the most unexpected turn my week has taken in years." "Yeah?" I nudged his shoulder. "You don't usually run into former students half naked in a sauna?" He laughed, shaking his head. "I should be so lucky." I paused. "Does it feel weird, being around me now?" "In this way." He looked over at me, serious again. "It doesn't feel weird, it feels overdue." We ended up back at his car, standing there in the shade of a maple tree, not quite ready to say goodbye. "I know we're taking this slow," he said, eyes on mine. "But I'm not here to play games." Neither am I. I meant it when I said I'd like to see where this could go. Me too. There was a moment. Quiet, steady, and then he stepped closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that I could feel the gravity of it. "Would it be too forward if I kissed you right now?" he asked. I shook my head, pulse roaring in my ears. "It'd be exactly right." So he did. Just once. Soft, sure, no hesitation. It wasn't fireworks or slow motion or anything movie-like. It was real, warm, like an answer to a question I hadn't realized I'd been asking since I was 17. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead lightly against mine. "Saturday just became my new favorite day," he whispered. I kept thinking that moment outside his car would be the peak, that maybe we'd both step back, let it cool down, chalk it up to chemistry and nostalgia, and let it fade into something harmless. But we didn't. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always with a glance across the weight floor that meant we're still doing this, right? And weekends turned into something quieter, a late-night movie at his place, a walk after dinner. Me leaning against his kitchen counter while he made coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't call it dating, but that's what it was. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, intentional. Still, there were moments where the weight of it all crept in, like the night he invited me over after work. It was raining, a steady fall tapping against his windows. He greeted me with that calm smile, the one that always made me feel like he'd been waiting, like I wasn't interrupting his life, but but somehow fitting into it. He handed me a towel for my hair, then a drink. "I made that bourbon honey tea you liked. You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said, like it was nothing. We sat on his couch, knees almost touching, some old black and white film playing in the background, more for the mood than the plot. I watched the glow of the screen bounce off his face, the way he turned toward me every few minutes like he was still amazed we were sitting this close. "Do you ever think about how weird this would have sounded 5 years ago?" I asked. "God, yeah," he chuckled. "If you'd told me back then I'd be on my couch with a former student, watching Cary Grant and making tea, I'd have laughed in your face. But you're not laughing now." He looked at me for a long moment. "No, I'm not." I turned toward him, fully. "So what is this, Nick?" It was the first time I'd asked, and I could see he wasn't surprised. "I've been trying not to define it too fast," he said, "because I don't want to scare you off. Or myself." "Try me," I said. He shifted closer. "Okay. This is me saying I don't want this to be temporary. I want to keep seeing you. Keep figuring this out. Keep doing whatever this is." "Something real?" I offered. "Yeah," he said. "Something real." Then he added, "You don't have to answer now." I shook my head. "No, I want that too." And there it was. The quiet, steady agreement that turned all the tentative maybes into something firmer, something worth holding on to. We stayed on the couch long after the movie ended, talking, touching in quiet, simple ways. His hand on my arm, my head against his shoulder. It wasn't about heat anymore. It was about closeness, presence, the comfort of being known. Later, when I finally got up to leave, he walked me to the door and kissed me again, slower this time, like he wasn't in a hurry to reach any kind of finish line. And as I walked back into the rain, my jacket barely shielding me from the chill, I felt warmer than I had in years. Whatever we were building, it was only getting stronger. A few months later, I was sitting across from Nick at our usual cafe, watching him try to steal the last bite of my croissant like we hadn't become creatures of shared routines. We weren't hiding anymore. Not that we were ever exactly hiding, but now we weren't being cautious either. He'd met my friends. I'd spent the night at his place more times than I could count. There were toothbrushes in both our bathrooms, socks that didn't match where they ended up. I knew the way he liked his coffee, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was trying to focus, the way he always touched my lower back when we crossed the street. And yet, every so often, I'd still catch him looking at me like he was remembering who I used to be, and realizing that this version, the man I was now, was someone he genuinely liked. "You ever think about what people would say if they knew how we met?" I asked him once, half joking. Nick didn't even blink. "They'd say it's weird. Then they'd realize we're adults and move on. Or they'd be jealous." I raised an eyebrow. "Jealous?" He smiled. "Yeah, because not everyone gets a second chance to reconnect with the person they once couldn't touch." It hit me then. Not just the truth of what he said, but the way he said person, not student. Because that's what we were now. Equals. Not bound by some past dynamic or power imbalance. Just two people who had lived enough life to know what they wanted, and who. The real turning point came one night when we ended up at the gym together, completely unplanned. I'd switched my workout time last minute, and there he was, already mid-set when I walked in. We locked eyes across the floor. He smirked, subtle, that knowing look that still made my pulse quicken. Afterward, we ended up in the sauna again, just like the first time. Only this time, we sat shoulder to shoulder. No distance, no cautious glances, just quiet familiarity. "I keep thinking about that day," I said. Nick looked over. "The first time?" "Yeah, you followed me in here. Or maybe I followed you, I can't even remember anymore." He leaned back. We both stepped in. That's all that matters. I let the silence hang for a moment. The steam soft around us. If I'd told my 17-year-old self this would happen, he wouldn't have believed me. Nick turned toward me. But he'd be proud, wouldn't he? For becoming someone brave enough to follow through? I nodded slowly. Yeah, he would. And maybe that was the real story. Not the teacher and the student, not the reunion at the gym. But what came after? The days that weren't about adrenaline or fantasy, but about showing up, making dinner, listening, being present. He reached over then, his fingers brushing mine. And in the heat of that same cedar-paneled room, where everything had first cracked open, I felt the solid, certain truth of what we'd become. This wasn't about nostalgia. It was about choosing each other now and every day after.